feel a little stuffed up, it's because indeed I am. So I apologize for that. But that was our 30th wedding anniversary. So I applaud Kevin. Congratulations on that. Hang in there. It's great fun. Systemness. I want to take just a minute just to take a brief run through. For those of you with us about a week and a half, this will be kind of like 2 days of your life flying in front of your eyes very quickly. So I apologize about the speed, but it is meant to be a recap. We have the slides, all the materials, and video, and some videos now forthcoming for these sessions if you need to take a deeper dive. The theme of the first day was it's a systems thing, not a single thing. We're not looking for singular solutions to solve complex problems. We're looking for a lot of different ways of disclosing the world and addressing the different kinds of problems that you and I kind of engage with on a daily basis. We gave you a definition of systemness, which is this quality, as we know from that ness kind of suffix on the word, that exists when people see and think of themselves as part of something larger. And because of that, they're able to start working together in new ways. Why? Well, because they actually can collectively see and understand some structures that were previously invisible to them. And we said, as long as it remains invisible, it's going to remain unsolvable or undissolvable. So part of leadership in this space is really just taking the things that are really intangible, abstract, and make them concrete and visible so we can see them, talk about them, think about them, and ultimately understand them. We talked a little bit of our own community with J.R. Miller and about the influence he had to all of us about thinking about systems. And our systems really aren't designed for the age that we live in. And yet it's our normal preference to rehabilitate people and fix people than it is to really redesign and reform the underlying systems in which we are all engaged in a big fabric of our life. This definition of a system that we gave, hopefully is pretty simple. The system is how we work together or not. But it is the system, is the way we serve people, the way of being in which we do so, and the way we approach problems together. We had this nice quote from Elio Saarinen, the architect, which I thought is a nice way to introduce this idea of one level up thinking, which we say is paramount to the idea of systemness. And he said, always design a thing considered in its next larger context. So a doorknob in the context of the door in context of the room in context of the floor plan, and so forth. And we looked at this visual to kind of think wherever you're at, whatever level of a system you perceive yourself at, it's best to always start by placing your problem or challenge or opportunity one level up from the place you perceive yourself to be. The reason why is that opens up a whole different set of possibilities than if we just remain at the level of the system we are and we start analyzing it by taking it apart. Because of that, we said there's different kinds of questions that we can really answer within a system, but we have to look in different places. For how kinds of questions, which kind of give us knowledge, that's really how does the system work? We can look at our level or below, and we can use a type of thinking called analysis, take it apart to understand and have more knowledge about it. But if you recall from our car example, any question that starts with the really letter, the word why does the car engine sit in front? Why do we drive on the right side of the road? Why do we say the first cars had 6 passenger seats? All of those questions can't be found within the car, within the system itself, no matter how much we take it apart through analysis. Instead, the only way to find that answer is this next larger system, the next larger containing process, which is the society and the culture it sits in. So if you recall, we said if you're looking for why questions, you look up to get understanding. If you're looking for how questions, you look down in order to gain knowledge, or up for purpose, down for function. But we always try to begin by placing the problem one level higher. From that, we found it by thinking of its context. In part 2, we talked briefly about 4 ways of really treating a problem, and this was the crux of the first day. And we addressed these 3 problems based upon how they kind of go around the word solve or solution. First was absolve. Ab, meaning to move away from, to forget, to leave it alone, to not really engage in the problem. Hope it goes away. Maybe it'll solve itself. The point here is we don't engage with the problem at all. The second kind, again, based upon the solve, is resolve. Here, the re means again. We've done this before. It seemed to work. Let's do it again and again and again. And this works pretty well until the environment or something changes. But it's based upon a very noble kind of type of service, efficient, Large scale, help as many students as possible, repetitive quality service. And to get there, it has to design for scale, right? And to get to scale, to get to efficiency, you have to put in place standards and you have to have sameness and equality to make scale work. And remember what we said about scale? Scale will scale anything, the good or the bad. So be careful what you ask scale to scale. The noble goal, though, here for this particular part of the system is really the most, getting the most things to the most people to do the most good. Most systems, as we said, start off trying to build scale as their primary function and then evolve kind of forward later. One way they evolve is they realize, well, scale doesn't work for everyone. So there's certain individuals who have variations that can't be accommodated by scale. So for them, we have to solve their problem, individual by individual by individual. So scale goes for that, what they call the middle, the average, the 80% that sits in the middle of the bell curve, where solution works those ends of the tails, the 20% of the population that don't fit within the standards we've created. So here we're looking for effective, not efficient, individualized complex service itself. And it's based upon a completely different set of characteristics because you're designing now not for scale, but for variation. So now we must take into effect and thought complexity, effectiveness, customization, differences, and so forth. What you see is completely the opposite when you're designing for scale, which I've put those characteristics at the bottom. There is a noble goal here, though, as there always is with each of these different problem-solving approaches. And for solution, the noble goal is the right. How do you provide the right things to the right people to achieve the right ends or outcomes? And then finally, we said there's yet additional way beyond solution. Instead of solving the same problem over and over and over again, we can actually begin to think about using a system approach to dissolve problems. We defined dis as really, say, not solving a problem. So if you're not going to solve it, well, what do? Well, you eliminate it. So dissolution approaches a problem by redesigning the underlying kind of set of conditions that are holding the problem in place, that are shaping the problem to begin with. So it's a completely kind of different change. For the first time, we're not working in the system like the other three approaches. We're working on the system itself. We looked at Rockford, Illinois as an example of this with this integrated command team that came together frequently to work by name list for homeless people in the community. Here, the noble kind of thought is you're trying to develop a coordinated, holistic system of service that really balances and seamlessly kind of connects the scale system and the variation system together on behalf of whoever's being served. We also introduced this thought, a two-step process of addressing problems, where first you solve a problem for a specific instance, and then based on what's learned, you extend that learning so you can dissolve the problem by using that knowledge to redesign the system for all those thereafter. We called that kind of solve for one, extend to many, and that was the extent of what we spent really the majority of our second day on. But to be clear here, the design principles again are very different. It's designing for systemness, for wholes, keeping them together, keeping them seamless and intact as wholes. Here it's about coordination, efficacy, again a clunky word, which means is the system even designed to do the right things? It's about relationships, systems, and ultimately outcomes at a systemic level itself. The noble goal here is always a whole seamless experience which improves the way you and I work together and organize what it is we do to serve the student. We kind of concluded this section by kind of giving a summary of absolution, right? Ignore it, forget about, hope it goes away, resolve, manage it, do it over again, solve it, work on causes, solving it for individuals. And we said these three approaches works inside the system, but the fourth approach is different and unique in its perspective and what it does in terms of a body of work. It actually works on the system to actually try to achieve dissolution over a long time. So again, we kind of gave you this primer key about each of these, but these last three are important, right? The key distinction between resolve, you're using previously employed behavior, but you're treating symptoms. You're helping people cope with or deal with a problem. Where solve actually gets to the actual causes, but you're treating the causes at an individual level again and again and again. And what makes dissolution different, of course, is we're eliminating the conditions that are causing that problem. Hopefully, it not only eliminates for the individual of concern, but for all individuals who experience such conditions in the future as well. So that kind of concluded the first day. We left with this mantra that this is a hierarchy of effectiveness, and it's always better to try to dissolve a problem than it is to solve it. We gave you some guiding questions, really to kind of think about your own work, about how you and your team are coming together to approach kind of student success, student achievement, and really where you think you're at now in terms of these three ways of approaching the problem of managing, solving, and dissolving. And ideally, where do you think the ultimate allocation of resources needs to be? And over the course, I think of cohort 2 here, I think that's really what you're trying to aim to get to, is to see if you can begin to make some of those changes. For part 3, we talked about we can actually map some of these ideas now. And the key idea, we have to understand that problem solving, which deals with parts and analysis, and it's always about what's wrong here, therefore it's deficit based and we're growing away from something. And we have to remember that the system building, which is problem dissolution, is a completely different body of work and mindset. It works on wholes and places them inside larger wholes, one level up thinking. It places things together and tries to make connections through synthesis. And it tends to be much more proactive, prospective, but asset-based, asking what is it we want to create. Therefore, we ensure we're actually growing towards something rather than just moving away from something we don't want. So it's a complete different change in mindset that we have to put ourselves in before we kind of move forward. So which of these kind of problem-solving approaches do we want? All of them, of course. Remember, it's not a one thing, it's a system thing. And so this is an ecosystem. So we need people managing problems and bringing about scale. We need the design for scale to help as many people as we possibly can. But we also need teams of people who are working on the fat ends of that bell curve. They're there because the system also needs to be designed for variation. There's where we get to our solve for one. And then finally, we all need as leaders to get better at helping to stand up teams that are designing for systemness, helping people see the system, coordinate scale and variation together into a seamless experience for all, and figure out how to dissolve problems over time. That's the extend to many. We also, talked about from within that system, there needs to be people to help kind of coordinate and lead. But the real important thing is we said, remember, each one of these things is necessary, not more important than the other or whatever, but each has a noble goal that needs to be honored and respected. And each of those circles needs to be allowed to play its part in the larger system to the maximum extent possible. We said you can kind of use this map. We gave you some tools, some handout tools and some poster tools, but you can really just think about any problem you're facing and just begin to ask the question, who's managing stuff, bringing things to scale? Who's solving problems, helping us adjust with variation? And who's helping over time dissolve problems? And you can begin to map those and help people see and better understand not only their own role, but the other role of people around them. We kind of gave an example, and I resubmit it here, of kind of what that looked like in a student counseling approach, which was also a community approach, and how we're able to blur the lines between systems, education systems and community health systems, to really reconceive it in a singular lens as a singular system, but now through roles instead of organizations or sectors. And then that way we can kind of cross this boundaries by just getting rid of the sector boundaries or getting rid of kind of the description. And we can just go back to what people are doing in the system itself, which helps get rid of those invisible barriers that causes so many problems in systems thought. We spent a bit of time on the second day really thinking about this example. If you recall, this was actually from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and this is how the GM or the Ford plant and all automakers of the big three were running at the time, where they would do the work and then they would see what problems exist and either rework it or scrap it. But we talked a lot about the Toyota way. And the Toyota way was really a method or a process of really dissolving problems as a way of doing business. And there's a few lessons that we actually learned from that, 5 in particular. 1, focus on the system itself, how we work together and improve that system over time and have the ability to show everyone else the system. If you recall, they were using cards at the time to show everyone what the system looked like, how material and work was moving through it. And anytime they made an improvement, they went and they changed the picture of the system so everyone had a collective shared image of the current system they were a part of. Remember the system definition, people thinking of themselves as part of something larger. 2, Ensure that improving the system's everyone's responsibility. You remember our chords. When someone found a problem in the system, they could stop, the line itself, and then begin to put in place kind of this approach to solving, problem solving that we've already hit with our 4 different approaches. Part of the thing here is, remember, try to always address problems not where they show up at the help desk or in the quality control booth. It's too late then, but upstream where they actually form, and have the courage to go upstream, maybe even a little bit further than you think you may. And then take all learning, and instead of putting it in individual minds, make it a part of the system. That's what leaders in the Toyota Way were doing. Anytime they learned something, they documented it, and they changed the picture of the system so it reflected the new learning of what they were able to extend to the overall process. And then finally, you don't need a top-down command and controller anymore as the keeper, is instead the keeper of the process, the system, and the learning that makes the work happen. So it's a real different kind of set of mindset. But it's worked in industry after industry after industry, whether it makes products or offers services. And we gave a practice assignment then to see if we could find a student, or your one, which really they're issued and experienced a problem in some type of program area. And we practiced having, you document the problem and then solve that one's problem by just asking the subsets. Where did the problem originate? But where did it show up? How did you solve it? What lessons were learned? And then what might this instance actually teach us about how the system we seek to redesign? You present those findings, and that's your solve for one piece. We looked at one last model of learning at the community of Somerville, Massachusetts, and you may recall Shape Up Somerville. And from there was important insight about context. We said if you're working with individuals, make sure you're putting them in context, because that's, again, where understanding is. Remember, one level up thinking. Take the person, put them one level up in their context, work on the context. So this way, again, we're thinking in wholes, we're thinking holistically, and we're not just problem solving. So the nice thing about their approach is they thought of 5 contexts, and they went to work on those 5 contexts by redesigning them. It was based in large part on some new research and thinking and redefinitions that came out, usually from the healthcare industry, about moving from attributes, illnesses, or disease as embedded to an individual, and moving those attributes, diseases, and problems and putting them within certain contexts. And so this was a major change of not just trying to solve obesity for individual children in Somerville, but actually trying to redesign the context that promote wellness for all children in the context that they live in Somerville. So a fundamental way in which they viewed where they were going to place the efforts of their work. We gave you 2 tools for this, kind of a system leadership kind of journey map, if you would, which showed the contexts. It allowed you to kind of see the students moving between these, but also allowed us to map the current state, what kind of touch points or things were we doing currently, but also future state. What are some of those additional types of strategies that we might want to employ? And you notice, because contexts are different, it makes you think and brainstorm about different things that you could ultimately do. So contexts make for great brainstorming tools when you're thinking about interventions, touch points, or strategies. And then we presented one more. This was just the 80s of systems change, which is a behavioral change model that's had great success really throughout the world in a lot of different problems. But it just gives you really ways of thinking, what things are we currently doing, again, a current state, and what additional things might we also do around these areas. Those areas being enforcement, policy, you must do X, encouragement, here's some incentives. If you do X, you get Y. Exemplify, please do X. Here's some exemplars and some good behaviors and things you can do. Support, how can we support and help you get better individually at those things that you want to kind of achieve? And then there's context, there's the big context. How do we change the context so making better choices is just easier? And then, of course, measure. Evaluate equity, how are we doing at X, and really trying to put things down. So again, a nice tool. You can look at your student success and student achievement efforts and just make sure you're pulling all the different kinds of systemic behavioral kinds of levers that you have at your disposal. We sum this all up after you kind of got done with 2 steps. It's just a reminder that thinking about systems and thinking within the contexts that each system kind of has, and every system usually has a whole number of contexts. But we told you, identify your one, whatever that is. It can be a student, it can be a department, it could be, a school within a college, it can be the college within the community, but just normally take and identify what one you're talking about. Two, how did you solve that problem? Go for a deep solution and document the solution, and you practice that. Three, try to pull out what the transferable principles are that you just learned from solving that problem of a student in context. And then from that, go out and see if you can redesign the system with those transferable principles, the design principles and the operating principles that you actually learned. Sorry, the design patterns and operating principles that you actually kind of extruded from the solution, and then see what other contexts that could be successfully deployed in as well. Remember, not everything transfers equally as well from context to context. So that's why that last stage is indeed separate. It's just a realization that not everything scales and not everything works the same when you change the context. So it's an additional design step that has to have deep consideration. We gave you this tool, the system redesign map, and if you remember, we really filled out the top, which was about the current state and the problem that we solved for R1. And then down below, we just simply put some things that we felt like are there and existing that we need to scale and replicate, some new things that we could do within each context to kind of improve whatever challenge we were trying to address, and then some things that we're doing well, but we may need to do better. Changes in policies and practices and so forth. But I think the important thing to remember, solve for one, and the current state at the top, and really the extend to many is the system redesign work, the future state on the bottom. Sorry, I didn't mean to click on that, or just flew across. Bear with me one second here. I need to stop, and we're going to reshare, and there we go. Sorry about that. That is actually a hot point you don't want to click on. Okay, finishing up here, we gave you an example of what this kind of looks like when you bring it together on a singular page. So you can go from the tools and the valuable conversation your team had about a story with a person or what question you were trying to address, and the person who encountered a problem in context in the system. You identified the context where the problem actually showed up. You identified the context where you thought that the problem formed. And this is why you always need to collaborate, because usually those contexts are separate and are separated by divisions or departments, maybe even universities or schools themselves, or even between a university and the community, but where you think the problem actually formed, and then see if you can map the other context in between. And then just filling in from your map, what did we decide we need to do better? What new things do we think we need to do about our work? And what existing things do we think we need to improve? Remember, it all says work, work, work on the left-hand side, because remember, the definition of a system is the way we work together. There is a video in the slides that went out. I re-put it here again today with our colleague Dakota Pollocky, who, if you don't remember, we have some facilitation instructions, but if you would like kind of a video walkthrough, we've provided kind of an 18-minute step-by-step video of how to facilitate the actual kind of completion of the system redesign map. So I just wanted you to recall that you've got that there for your work. That's it. So I know that was really, really, really quick, but I think the key messages that we kind of talked about last time, you have sometimes one opportunity to take a problem and put it higher in the system. Make sure you can do that as early as possible. It can be done later, but it always has more fruit, and you create more possibilities by putting it higher. Remember, there is no one way to approach a problem. There are a number of ways, and we need to be thoughtful and be in agreement about which approaches we're going to use and what our own role and what your others' role are within that system. And then the best way to change something really complex is to rehumanize it, get it down to a scale in which we can all identify, which for a lot of us is the student. It's the beneficiary we all serve. And so starting with that makes the system work, which seems overwhelming, a lot more tangible and a lot more concrete. And then just like the Japanese, you improve it over and over. You rinse, right? You repeat, you do it over, just like the shampoo instructions always say. And that's how you continuously make a system better. So thank you once again for that kind entry. Hopefully some of that sounded familiar, but this time, I'm going to turn it back to Lily, and I know she'll have some facilitation instructions for you.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you. Yeah. That is our overarching process and context and kind of framework for the system redesign work. Um, but don't worry if you're not sure what happens beyond step one today, because that's really where we're focusing on. Jack's, especially the whole understanding of the context, the one level up, the solve for one, extend to many, the design team. I mean, those are all pieces of a project. They're all pieces of the puzzle and the work that we're doing. Um, and today, our goal at this point in the process is to really think through this one. What is maybe a recurring challenge that you see? It can be complex, it can be maybe very common, but something that you see that's coming in to the system over and over that you think there is a real opportunity for redesign here. And we need to identify who are our service, team, who is our solution team, who could be on this design team, who are the leadership that we need to make sure we're all on the same page and that there is, institutional support for this work. And then, that's kind of where we are today. And so what I'm hoping that we can do in breakout is feel free to introduce yourselves again in case there are folks that you didn't have a chance to personally talk to at the retreat, or you just want to learn more about each other. And then please share kind of three things, and I'll put them in the chat or we'll broadcast this once we get into breakout rooms. Um, the first is, who is your one? What does that individual look like? What is the issue that they're bringing to you? What is the context that you're seeing it in? And there could be multiple contexts in which you're considering. And then, who are the players? Who are your stakeholders? Because I think that that's really where we need to start right now in thinking about identifying our common challenge or our problem, and identifying the key stakeholders that will be a part of this work as we move forward if we want to do any kind of thinking about the system in the whole. Okay, does that sound like a good place to start? Okay, great. Well, Stephanie is going to open up about 6 breakout rooms that we hope are evenly divided. And then you'll have, let's see, what time is it? It's 3 o'clock. We'll have 15 minutes to go in breakout room, and then we'll come back for another 15 minutes or so of sharing out. Okay. So go ahead and join your breakout rooms, please. And Jack, you do not need to join a breakout room. I see you in there. I don't know if I got assigned to.
I'll hang tight.
Okay. I guess I should stop recording. Welcome back, everyone. Okay. Well, it's 3:15, and I am very interested to hear how breakouts went, conversations with fellow cohort members, ideas for projects. I'm interested in all of it. Do we just want to kind of go around and one person can kind of represent the room and lift up any questions, themes, additional insights requested, that kind of thing?
Well, I can tell you what happened in our group.
Thank you, Kasha.
So then other people can take. So we just went around the room and kind of wanted to get a feel for where everybody was with their thought process for their projects. And we had at least one person that hadn't quite made it all the way there. So we brainstormed some ideas of how to take his big concepts and maybe drill them down a little bit. But looks like there's a lot of work going on with non-traditional, increasing the non-traditional population. advisory groups. Some things were just extending on things they were already working on, and really honing in on what that student profile looks like of the non-traditional population so that they can share that information with their faculty and help the entire institution understand this population better. Another one was specific to the workforce, non-traditional workforce, their orientations, they're not associated with, they don't feel as included in the institution. So if we could get they're going to start, again, that first step, right, is maybe building a resource guide. So getting all the stakeholders, talking to the students, getting all the stuff, all the areas of the college, get them together. What information is it we really want them to have so that they can be more included in the community as a whole, the institutional community. Internships, trying to find better ways to get faculty to get more involved to help students with that internship process and finding, so really making connections between faculty and employers. So trying to figure out how to start that project. Career readiness, in this case, career readiness, a little bit broader, like not just getting the job, but excelling in the job, advancing in the job. So really looking at alumni and employers and really focusing on that group. And then adult education and transition to post-secondary. We're looking at a specific population that are already close, like we would call them co-requisite ready, right? And seeing if we can't streamline the process of letting them acquire their their high school equivalency while earning college credit at the same time. So some broad idea projects, and I don't know what else they got out of it, but I found it very interesting. I'm mute, Lily.
Thank you. Thank you, Kasha. Any other groups or individuals want to share? What else?
Well, I don't necessarily want to add to the piece of talking about each individual's project, because some of ours are still in development, but just the amount of excitement that my group had about everything was contagious. And everyone is so, fully on board and thinking about how they can make an impact. So I really enjoyed the breakout session.
Thank you, Rachel. Great to hear.
I will share from our group. We seem to have this common thread of trying to find the gaps that students are experiencing on their own student journey. So really like a first step almost is student journey mapping of like what this looks like when they express an interest, and then seeing where those kind of gaps are for the student, especially when it comes to connecting them to like student services, mental health resources, all the things you get as part of a college community, but how students of certain types of like academic backgrounds, for example, like if they're a transfer student, might not have the same level of awareness of those resources than, like a traditional age student. So trying to figure out how to connect the campus a little bit better, but that's going to differ on every campus. So there's definitely layers there, but some organizational restructuring that makes more sense to student success than perhaps like traditional organizational structures. So that seemed to be like a through line of all of our projects.
Very cool. Thank you, Hannah.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that you're forecasting some tools that may be helpful.
I love some journey mapping.
Anybody else? What else?
Lily, I will speak just really, I'll speak briefly, but our group was we're kind of eclectic. We've got some stuff for the dual credit, some stuff for military, some stuff for retention, and some stuff for death on campus, and then also HR. So we are very eclectic. So we're excited if we all get to talk again to see what we all have. So.
Thank you, Anita.
You're welcome.
I guess I can speak up for our group. We had a couple different projects we were considering. One was on student resources. So some of us were working on the two gaps you see there, letting students know what resources are available, and then moving students to actually use those resources. And then we were talking about another project of looking at students who withdraw very early in the semester, not in week 4 because they're struggling with stuff. But what about those students we lose early on? And because we both groups that we're talking sort of had at least a skeleton of an idea of what they wanted to work on, we were able to move on and start listing, okay, who are the stakeholders that we need to talk about and so forth, and then just commiserate and share the experiences that we had with each other on these topics, and that's always healthy to do.
Thank you, Shane. That's great. Brainstorming your partners already. Was there one more group that maybe hasn't shared out yet?
I don't know if my group has shared, but common themes here. We talked a lot about kind of the gap in knowledge of resources and then actual utilization of those resources that are available. And there's a lot of talk of non-traditional students and building that framework for them and how do we get faculty knowledgeable about the different needs and situations that non-traditional students are in. So that was kind of what our conversation was built around.
Thank you, Jordan. Jack, I want to give you kind of the floor before I have final words. Do you have any thoughts or, as you've heard all the different conversations, what are you thinking right now?
Great conversations. Let me try to just give a few wrap-up thoughts. Be sure you're thinking in themes, which is great. Always a great starting place, especially we're at stage 0 or stage 1 right now in the process wheel. So everyone seems to be kind of on the right track. Remember, the goal is to attach those themes to the one. You're trying to find an actual real individual in your context that's experiencing that theme. So just make sure you don't get in the usual approach of problem solving where you go for a theme and then just jump right to the stakeholders themselves and go for that. Make sure that you truly have a one who's representative of that theme. So it's fine to start with themes, but get it down to the one. Remember, you're trying to rehumanize the system by getting it down to a one. So it's very concrete to your school and your context and the theme that you're trying to address. Also be careful about defining populations because that will kind of take you away. There's so much variation even within populations that we define. You're kind of starting to already balloon the one out into a lot of different directions. So have the courage to start small. Have this courage to start back with concrete, real individuals with real circumstances, and then let it kind of extend out from there. Also, don't jump to solutions right away. The one is there to co-create things. So if you come with too much of a description or thought, you may take away a lot of possibilities. Let the one help you define what the design parameters or the design constraints or the design solutions actually might be before you get too far down the road. Hence why it's really, again, important to get to that one and have a deep understanding of what would solve the problem for that individual and spending that time there to have that. And I think finally, just ask yourself back at the home ranch, what problem are we constantly solving day after day, week after week, month after month? That makes phenomenal kind of, I think, meat to kind of go after, those ones that have the most pressing, I think, urgency. And then second, we kind of say that, a lot of design is what they call the middle. If you're thinking of a bell curve, you've got that big middle, the 80% of people that fall within that large section in the middle of the curve. But, what you're really trying to do with kind of the solve for one is look for those two tails. But you don't want such a fringe case that you don't think that the impact of solving it for the one with all its complexity would have a lot of applicability to others. So you're trying to have this horizon that you kind of stay within without necessarily falling over, if you would. And that horizon is being within the 20% of the population that fits on these tails, but not even outside of that or all the way at the end of the tails themselves, the 1%. I think, as I heard in the break, Stephanie kind of say, you're looking for a one who, if you thought, if we could really figure this out and deeply solve this problem and find a way to reshape the system, it would have a magnitude of effect for many others. And so I think those are some good parameters just to keep in mind. What problems are we solving constantly? What one student represents that situation? And are there, complexity has to be there, but it just can't be some fringe case that you think this has got a lot of it. It has to be a case that you think that would represent the same set of conditions that would also impact a lot of other beneficiaries or students. So hopefully those are some parameters just to keep in mind as you go from these great themes and try to get it shaped and molded into one so you can start to do some of that journey mapping and start to actually begin to pull out some of the lessons from very specific solutions of real people in context. Otherwise, I'm excited for all of you. Great work.
Thank you, Jack. Yes, excellent. So I was just going to share a little bit about how this is going to connect to our next module and the next content session we have, which is October 8th. That's a Wednesday from 2 to 3:30. These hour-and-a-half content sessions are going to feel like there's a lot. They will be recorded. You'll be able to go back and access all of the PowerPoints and the speaker, speaking to us because it's a virtual session. At any point, you also have your toolkit, which is hopefully a good resource and kind of a facilitation guide for you as you're trying to maybe bring your stakeholders together to talk about these conversations with the other folks on your campus or in your organization. Our next session is AIM statements and driver diagrams. And so what I would say is your kind of homework right now is to just take the theme to get a sense of your actual one, but then take it into the context and identify your stakeholders, because those folks, you really want to get them on board as we go into session 3. Or module 3, so that you can come and you can clearly, hopefully, facilitate the right people around the table to think clearly about the goal that you might set for this project. And remember, the goal is, I don't want to use that word twice in 2 different meanings, but for the capstone goal is that this is work you're already doing. I don't want this to be no new programs. That's not what we're talking about. We are talking about the work that is going to be very value add to your role, to your institution, et cetera. So thinking about what's already a high priority, who are those people that have common agreement that we all have a vested interest in improving X outcome. And then in module 3, we're going to really create that focused goal statement and look at the big drivers or those levers for change. As we move through that activity, that's when we get into the discovery projects. That's when we really get into student journey mapping, empathy mapping, persona development, process mapping, and those tools will help you really uncover the gaps and identify some of the challenges in our institutional processes. So that is coming. And that will be a wonderful activity to do together with your stakeholders so that you can all be co-creators of where you really see the change that needs to happen and creating the ideas of the possibilities for what it can look like. Okay, so that's a little bit of the big picture. Don't forget, and I think I've already posted a link to modules 1 and 2 content from the Impact Exchange. Jack has provided videos of his sessions that have a time starting point. So even though it's a very long video, he has set it to begin right at the point of takeoff that we need. You don't probably have to watch the whole ending. You'll know when it's done. But please, thank you, Jack, so much for providing that to us. And then the last thing that I just wanted to say is that we do have a pulse check survey. And so again, your feedback is super helpful and important. It's like 5 questions. So if you don't mind, Stephanie, if you could throw that into the chat, and then just please take 3 seconds before you move on to your next activity on a busy day. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I will post this recording in the Impact Exchange. And if anybody has additional thoughts, comments, questions, feel free to reach out to me and Stephanie. We'll see you October 8th.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.